Welcome to a Trekzone conversation where we dive into science fiction. Today, Robert Hewitt Wolfe is here, television writer who, among many credits, spent 5 years on DS9. Robert, thanks for your time.
Happy to be here.
Now, your first foray into Star Trek was selling the script for a fistful of datas before joining the DS9 writing staff. That came after 5 years of trying to get a break with your bachelor's degree in film and TV with a master's in fine art screenwriting. Was Trek what you were after? Was Trek what you were after, or was it a happy coincidence?
Yeah, it was kind of a happy coincidence, to be honest. I wasn't laser focused on Star Trek the way I would say, for example, Ron Moore or Renee Echevarria were. Ron especially. I think Ron was like laser focused on Star Trek. I was laser focused on being a professional writer in some way in the film and television industry. And honestly, I was originally very much focused on feature film writing. And that was what my almost first break was a spec feature that I wrote that almost got bought, and then that deal fell apart. But that script was the script that they read at Star Trek that got me invited to pitch. And 3 pitch sessions later, I sold the pitch, fistful of datas, and they because of the strength of the script, the feature script that I'd written that they'd read, they let me write the first draft of the script itself. So yeah, that's the short version.
Well, over the next 5 years, you penned 37 episodes, including the beginning of Kai Wynn in the season 1 finale, the introduction to the Dominion in The Search, the thought-provoking two-parter Past Tense, and the incredible two-parter which saw Earth attacked and a siege mentality adopted. Is there one script or screenplay that you look back on now with great memories?
I mean, the entire experience on Deep Space Nine was terrific, and a lot of everything you just credited, except I think in the Hands of the Prophet, I co-wrote with Ira, who was the showrunner after the second season, and so that was an amazing experience being a staff writer, story editor, a low-ranking writer on the show, and being able to be the co-writing episodes with the showrunner all the time was terrific. I think if there was probably a standout that I wrote on my own, it was probably The Wire. Although obviously, like, the whole staff worked with me on that too. But that was just like, it was a bottle show. It was like a performance piece for the actors. It was really all about the words and the acting. And so that was really special, I think. But I'm very proud of, like you said, Past Tense, Homefront, Paradise Lost. Way of the Warrior was a lot of fun to do too. And that was bringing Worf on board. So I was blessed, I got to work on some really terrific episodes, and we had a great cast that bring everything through that brought everything to life. It was the sort of perfect, most amazing first writing job experience you could have, I would say.
Well, Ira really sort of took the franchise by the horns and moved it in a direction that Gene probably necessarily wouldn't have agreed with. But do you think it was the right move for Star Trek to sort of move into these shades of grey and be on a station and really have this moral ambiguity of going on around the place?
I think it was the right way to go. I think it wasn't that far off from what Gene was doing in the original series. It might have been a departure from what his intentions were for Next Generation. But certainly moral ambiguity and shades of gray and difficult decisions were a huge part of what made the original series episodes special. And being on a space station, weirdly, it kind of forced us to go in that direction, I think. We were outside the Federation, which was Michael's intention from the very beginning. On the frontier, again, Michael Pillar's intention. And one of the things that we realized being on a space station was that the problems wouldn't go away. We couldn't go away from the problems like they could on Next Generation on the original series. We didn't warp out at the end of the week. And so that meant that everything that we did would potentially come back to haunt us. And that's sort of what led to some of the serialized storytelling. Yeah.
And working with Ira as well, like, I guess where I'm sort of heading with that is we're almost 3 decades on from the start of Deep Space Nine, and it's sort of coming back in a bit of a resurgence now. The fandom is sort of picking it up again, and I guess that every now and then the series sort of get re-highlighted. We saw Enterprise a few years ago with people discovering that for the first time, I guess with Discovery's timeline and stuff like that. But what is it like to sort of be sitting and beaming into Trekzone now and talking about Deep Space Nine, these 5 years from 3 decades ago?
It's fun. It's a little like, revisiting your career as like a college athlete, I suppose. That was my post-grad education. But I'm incredibly proud of the work we did. And we were at the time, and we always were hopeful that the show would have legs and people would still enjoy it decades later. So it's very satisfying to know that people are watching it a lot of times for the first time and enjoying it. And so I'm happy to talk about it. It's like, I'm happy to talk about, the child I helped raise that's since gone on and done well in the world. And it's flattering that people are still enjoying it. And so it's fun to talk about for sure.
Well, can you recall any times where it was near on impossible to break a script for DS9?
Wow. The truth is they were all hard work, but they were all hard work we believed we could do. We had again, like I was the most junior member. So when I say we, I mean, really, it was Ira's team and Michael's before that. But we always had terrific writing staffs, and we always felt like there was nothing we couldn't figure out if we all put our heads to it. There were a few stories that got abandoned early in the process where Ira just wasn't feeling it, or there were ones that got shelved for a while because he didn't really understand. He didn't really see it take a way into the story from character that made him happy. But once we got in the room and we were committed to making something work, we always felt like we could do it. And I think 95% of the time we were right. I mean, there's a few stinkers in there that we didn't quite, nail. But most of the time, I think when we put our heads to it, we always got to where we needed to be.
Well, you came back to write Field of Fire in the 7th season. What motivated you to return for that one-off?
They asked me, and I was available, and I thought it'd be fun, especially because it was a Ezri story, and I hadn't never written Ezri. And part of the reason why I kind of left at the end of 5 seasons was I was a little burned out, to be honest. It was incredibly demanding, 26 episodes a year, really no break. And so I'd sort of been going for 5 years straight writing these characters, and I thought I'd kind of written most of what I had to say about these characters. And I was tired. I just needed a break. And so after that, I went and I did some of my own stuff. And so when they asked me to come back, I was excited. I thought it'd be fun. And it was really fun to revisit the show and to revisit those characters. But it was also really fun to be able to write Ezri. And Nicole's great, and Nikki's great. And so, yeah, it was a really great situation. They actually did ask me to write one of the final 10 in the 10-parter. And I didn't. I said no to that because I felt like that would have been much harder to jump into. It would have been much harder for me to do one part of the 10-parter. I felt like that would have done the show a disservice. As a freelancer to do that, I felt like they needed to do that with the staff. And so I turned that one down. But Field of Fire was a lot of fun to do.
Well, let's touch on Andromeda now. Kevin Sorbo in the lead. Was he in your mind when you developed the series?
Well, he was in the company's mind because that's what they had. They had notes, Gene Roddenberry's notes, his like back file of stuff that was unproduced, and they had Kevin. And so the challenge was to create a show around those things. Here's this. It's like what was that? Iron Chef. You don't remember Iron Chef, that
Yep.
Japanese cooking show?
Yep.
Where they'd have the ingredient of the week and they'd have to make some kind of amazing dish out of it. Well, the ingredient of the week I had was Kevin Sorbo and notes from Gene Roddenberry and a starship. That was it. And that's what, those are the 3 things that had to be in the dish. So that's what I cooked.
Put it in a blender and something comes out.
Things. Yeah, I like to think it was a little better than like a sports drink. I think it was better than a smoothie. I'd like to believe, at least had aspirations to be a really nice meal. And I think we did the best we could with the money we had, to be honest. That was the biggest problem for the show, was the budgets were just microscopic. And so the execution of what we wanted, wasn't always as up to the level of like what the ambitions of the show were.
Well, you left after the second season, with history noting that you and the studio differed on where to take the series. Now, as someone who
I got
hasn't...
my ass fired is what happened.
I was putting it nicer than that.
No, that's fine.
Well, as someone who hasn't had a studio medal in my show, what's it like to get that call and to disagree with it so much so that you get fired?
Well, what I disagreed with was that I wanted to be the head writer, and what they wanted was to get rid of me so they didn't have to pay me my season 3 bonuses. So it was a situation. In fact, when I took the job, everyone told me, look, Tribune is going to get rid of you at some point, because they'll backload the contract with a bunch of really nice financial kickers, and they don't want to pay that. And so most of the time they fired their showrunners in season 1. They got the creators of like Earth Final Conflict or Beastmaster or whatever else. And so I lasted a lot longer than I expected. But at the end of the day, it didn't make any economic sense to them to keep me longer than 2 seasons. They had to get rid of me in the middle of season 2. Otherwise, they would have been paying me a lot of money for the next 3 seasons. And then there were the creative differences, I would say, were that they wanted the show to be kind of a sci-fi action hour, emphasis on the action, de-emphasis on the science fiction. They didn't really want the moral dilemmas that I think make the sort of Roddenberry shows interesting. They just wanted it to be a run and jump, punch 'em up kind of thing. Lots of lasers. And Kevin wanted his character to be right all the time. He didn't really like it when Dylan Hunt had a moral dilemma that he had to figure out his way through. He just wanted to be like, have a certain moral rectitude and certainty that I wasn't that interested in writing. Although I was certainly trying to adjust the show to meet their needs. So it wasn't really a surprise. It was sort of like every episode I was doing after a certain point on that show, it felt like when the freighters go, escape Hoth, and everybody cheers when one of them gets away. And eventually, you're going to lose that base, So it's really a question of how many good things you can get onto the air or into space before those AT-ATs finally destroy you. That's how it felt.
Well, there's also one-off episodes to your credit in the Twilight Zone, the Dead Zone, and some extended time with the 4400. Not to mention the Dresden Files, which ran for a season. Out of that period in the 2000s, what held your passion the most?
Well, Dresden Files was the biggest one, because that was Hans Beimler and I from Star Trek developed those books into a series, and so that one was like, I worked my butt off on that one. And in fact, I was on set for every episode shooting. I was in post. I mean, that was really my baby. Coming in to do an episode of Twilight Zone for Ira and an episode of Dead Zone for Michael were just like fun freelance things that I did. But I wasn't part of those families. I was sort of like, if not, I was sort of the dad of Dresden Files-ish, maybe the mom, I don't know. But that was really more mine. And it was fun. It was very challenging. It was another situation where the way the show was set up financially and the responsibilities on that show were sort of muddied. It wasn't I like to think I was running a good ship, but there were problems above in the same way there were on Andromeda, which wasn't the case obviously wasn't the case on Star Trek, where it was like a well-oiled machine. And that's probably what ultimately doomed that show, unfortunately, was like, corporate politics above us.
Yeah.
But it was fun to do. It's fun while it lasted.
As the internet started to become popularized to connect fans together, you could be found on message boards for the Dresden Files. Did having that direct connection with the fans have any influence any influence on the decision making on the show?
None whatsoever. But I'd started that even back in the day on Deep Space Nine. I was on the Usenet boards, and Andromeda, I had a lot of interaction with the fans. But by the time the fans see an episode of something, we're 6 months ahead.
Yeah.
You know, the machine is churning. By the time they saw an episode of the Dresden Files, we were done. Like it didn't air until we'd finished working on it, essentially. And that was also the case with the first season of the 4400. We were 6 months ahead of the fans on Andromeda. We were 6 months ahead of the fans on Deep Space Nine. And so it's great to hear what they have to say. It's really fun interacting with the fans online most of the time. But
most of the time.
Not much. Most of the time. But there's not much that, as far as influence, no, there's not really. Especially nowadays, like now, shows are a year ahead of the fans. I mean, by the time an episode of The Boys airs, they're working on the next season. So I would say, like, it's easy to overestimate how much influence the fans have on the creators just because of the time situation. Just because, like, how can you influence something that's already happened? It's not possible, So.
Well, conversely, what's it like to then watch the fans theorize about what's coming, where the directions are heading, and all the while knowing exactly where things are going? I guess, and you've got to hold yourself back from spoiling everything. But what's that like to watch the fans on the journey?
I think it's great. One of the fun things about the internet, I enjoy interacting with the fans, and I love seeing them react to the things that we've done and see where their heads are at and see what they think is coming. It's a lot of fun, and I hope it's fun for them to interact with us too, with the creators and writers and actors who are willing to engage in that. And no one should feel like obliged to do that. I've been on shows where they sort of tell everyone they have to do it, and that's fine. But it's better when people are being genuine and really do enjoy engaging with them. So I get a kick out of it, and I hope fans get a kick out of interacting with us too. It's fun. It's different from back in Deep Space Nine days, the early days of Deep Space Nine, where it was just we get a letter every once in a while. We didn't get like regular feedback from anyone.
Well, are there any projects on the horizon for you at the moment? Where can we find you next?
There's nothing I can talk about. I am about to launch into something new. I mean, I had nothing going on during COVID except I published my third book and finished the trilogy of YA books that I wrote. But I do have something. I am starting it this week. I'm literally getting a get-together with the network and my co-creator tomorrow night. And I can't say a damn thing about it, which is another thing that's different these days. Like, you can't talk about shows now that you're working on. And sometimes it takes 2-3 years to get them on the air. And like, am I working? Yes. Is it something awesome and cool? Yes. Is it an adaptation of something awesome and cool? Yes. Can I tell you anything more about it other than that? No. Can I tell you what the network is? No. Can I tell you who the studio is? No. Can I tell you like the name of the author? Nope. I can't, so yes, there's something awesome. But in the meantime, watch reruns of Elementary and read my books, I guess, and find me on Twitter because you won't see it for 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
Hopefully there's something else I'm working on too that might be less than that, or it might never happen at all. This one I think will definitely happen, but it's a long way out.
Well, given that you have this project coming up, you're very busy. If that wasn't there and Alex Kurtzman rang you up or someone showrunning Star Trek at the moment rang you up, would you consider freelancing for them and writing a script?
Of course, yeah. But the practicalities of that are like, the realities of that are that it's incredibly difficult for those stars to line up. But yes, of course, if I love Star Trek, if someone said, "Hey, would you want to write an episode of Lower Decks?" I'd be like, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
Well, that was going to lead me into That was going to lead me into my next question. Which series would it be? There's 5 in production at the moment.
I enjoy them all, to be honest. I have friends who work on every single one of them or have worked on every single one of them. I jokingly said Lower Decks, but I probably have the most fun doing Lower Decks just because it's like a half hour, it's comedy, and it's like you don't get to do comedy some people would argue we never successfully did comedy on Deep Space Nine. I would at least point to Little Green Men and say, no, we managed it a few times.
Plenty of comedy in
but look,
DS9, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think, look, I don't know anything about Brave New Worlds, but Strange New Worlds?
Strange New Worlds.
Strange New Worlds. Yeah, yep. Sorry about that. Strange New Worlds, but I love those actors. They'd be a blast to write for. And look, as a writer, that's usually what you're looking at. Are the writers that are you going to be able to write for some fun characters and some fun actors? And the truth is, with all four of the ones I've seen, all three of the ones I've seen and little glimpses you've gotten of what Strange New Worlds will be, the answer is going to be yes, So as a writer, as a Star Trek fan, yeah, I'd do any of them. I'd have a lot of fun. But the practicalities, again, are like, the likelihood of that happening is tiny. Just because my schedule would have to line up, they'd have to have a need, which a lot of them don't. They don't need me. They've got wonderful, talented people writing for them. They got Michael Chabon. They don't need Robert Wolfe, Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, guy who wrote 3 YA fantasy books and a bunch of Star Trek. I mean, there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of talent. And like I said, a lot of them are my friends. So I know some of the people who are working on the second season of Picard or on Strange New Worlds or on the new animated show that hasn't come out yet. The name Prodigy?
Prodigy, yep.
No. Prodigy, yes, Star Trek Prodigy. I know people on that. I've known people who've done work on Discovery. And they've got super talented, wonderful writers. And so, yeah, sure, you want to call it the old dude from Deep Space Nine? I'll do one. But do you need the old dude from Deep Space Nine? Yeah, probably not. So.
Robert, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. It's been fun. It's been a blast. Thanks for beaming in.
Yeah, thanks.
Keep up to date with Twitter. Catch new podcasts daily on YouTube. Plus, we're beaming to your favorite podcast app 5 days a week. Just search for Trekzone and subscribe.